On today's episode, Dr. Nathan Goodyear, an integrative oncologist, talks to us about some of the unique challenges in his practice, things that shocked him when he entered the field, and some innovations he's doing at the Williams Cancer Institute. Stay tuned. Dr. Nathan Goodyear's coming right up. I've been wanting to have you on for quite some time, so thank you for joining me this morning. I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself. I know a little bit about your story as far as you started as a traditional physician and now you're doing integrative oncology. So how did you get on that journey?
Wow. As everybody, I think when you look at the integrative oncology, I think practice, most people have a story there. And honestly, life is about stories. It's about chapters. And so for me, I was blessed with having a good friend who was a compounding pharmacist when I was in residency. And I was, basically learning everything that I was learning. And he would always challenge me. And so that set the stage. And so then when I came out into clinical practice in 2004, primarily as a pelvic floor surgeon, I noticed that there were things that we did that helped patients, but there were also things that we did that did not help a large number of patients. So that started to, I think, trigger that curiosity in mind about how do we help everybody? We can't treat everybody through a protocol-driven practice. And so, as everything in integrative medicine, a lot of it you'll cut your teeth with hormones. And so, for me as a GYN, that was a great place to start. And so, helping women with hormones, of course, I had to uneducate myself as it relates to how you prescribe hormones from a non-pharmaceutical perspective. But then, as I transitioned out of that into the treatment of men, because the wives, the mothers, the women said, "Can you help my husband?" I was like, "How hard can that be?" Well, I learned that men can be more hormonal than women. They just manifest it differently. So then as I migrated through both of those, that question that always came up was about cancer. What's my risk of cancer by taking hormones? I had cancer. What's my risk now? And how does all of this play? So cancer was always in it. But then as I started to migrate through my clinical practice, I actually moved into pure integrative medicine in about 2010. And then so did that for about 8 years. And then I had my own tumor. And it was really interesting as I was in integrative medicine, again, patients with cancer kept coming into the practice. It was like, wow, we're not advertising this. It's wellness, it's integrated medicine. But they wanted this integrative perspective to go along with the conventional. And so then when I had my own tumor, a pheochromocytoma, I knew at that point, boom, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so I moved out to Arizona where I could become licensed as both an MD, a medical doctor, and an MD homeopath. And so and I've been doing that now since early 2008. And here it is, 2025.
Talk to me a little bit. One of the similarities we have is actually hanging up that scalpel and making that one-way decision that I'm not going to operate anymore. And I know it was a huge struggle for me because I felt like if I left, I could never get back into that. Was that the same type of struggle you faced, or was it a little different perspective?
My wife has always told, I'm good with my hands. And so I love surgery has a place. Mm-hmm. Conventional oncology has a place. We just would rather it have less place because of its destructive capacity.
Yeah.
But, for me, I was involved in that pelvic floor mesh fiasco, if you have any recollection of that. And, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things about how the dark side of medicine. That is, there are pressures to push doctors that don't really stand in evidence, that don't really stand in what's best for the patients. And so for me, that really opened my eyes to a lot of what can happen in medicine. But, for me, putting up the scalpel, I think I learned a lot through surgery. I learned a lot to problem solve. I learned a lot to think outside the box because you go into surgery, you recognize this with a plan, right? But everything always changes. Always. And so you have to be ready to pivot. And so for me, it was always about envisioning that process before surgery and then going into surgery and then being ready to adapt. And so I think that helped me. That taught me how to go into everything with a plan, but be ready to pivot, be ready to change, because it's going to happen and you must do that. If we try to go into medicine and treatment of the body and think everything's going to be standard, everything's going to be protocol, we're going to miss on helping a lot of people.
Yeah. So how
So
did you slide
for me,
in?
it was easy to put it up. It was easy to put up the scalpel.
Yeah. I've never looked back since. Once I finally made the decision, it was the right. I hated the OR environment so much. It was so hostile in where I was. I
So
don't miss that at
sterile.
all.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
sterile. So sterile. It's just
Yeah, exactly. So as you were getting into integrative oncology more full time, what were some of the things that you didn't expect to happen that kind of came to light and evolved your practice? What were some of the biggest surprises as you moved into that space?
wow, that's a good question. Um, I think one thing is the pushback from conventional oncology. A lot of people will call it traditional oncology. I'm like, no, no, no. Traditional is Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese medicine. That's traditional. What we're talking about is more modern, which is conventional.
Yeah.
Um, it was the pushback from conventional oncology as I tried to bridge with them in the care of patients. I was always shocked at that. And I'm still shocked at it today. Because, for example, the simple concept of repurposed medications, there's a couple flagships I focus on because it's kind of put out there as the flagship. Like, for example, high dose IV vitamin C,
Mhm.
repurposed medication. So, whether it's from the conventional or the more integrated perspective, those are right there front and center
Mhm.
as focus points. And
Mhm.
so I think it's a good area to build bridges with conventional doctors because I
Yeah.
am one.
Yeah.
But I've always found the lack of curiosity on their part to
Yeah.
learn something new or learn something outside of the box. And so
Mhm.
for me, that's always surprised me. And
Mhm.
even in this new digital age and social media, where I'll do a social media reel and I'll discuss. I discuss a study. I say, here's a study talking about X, Y, Z,
Mhm.
and people, doctors and other people, non-doctors, push back on it. It's like, this is just a study I'm talking about. The references are right there. Dive into the study. So the lack of curiosity in mind, the lack of critical thinking, I think is one of the biggest things that has surprised me. But then when I reflect back on my training, I was like, we were taught how to think. Excuse me, we were taught what to think. We
Mhm.
weren't really taught
Mhm.
how to think independently.
Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised in retrospect, but that continues to surprise me moving forward even to this day. So that's probably one of the biggest things. But the
Mhm.
second would probably be the the concept of how much therapeutics are out there from natural, holistic, and integrative that can be used standalone or in conjunction with conventional medicine, and
Mhm.
how that can help
Mhm.
improve patient outcomes,
Mhm.
improve patient efficacy, and reduce patient side effects and improve quality of life. For me, it's like, wow, that's a win-win-win situation. And so then that third part is, why does medicine not embrace this?
Mhm.
If we can help therapies be better, more efficacious, and then we can reduce side effects, why not?
Win-win
But there's a
again. Yeah.
I don't know. So those would probably be the biggest things that I've seen, but they're
Yeah.
not just in the past; they continue to the day.
Yeah. I totally agree with those. And the IVC, the literature came from conventional medicine that I can see. University
Yeah,
of Iowa just published a small study on pancreatic cancer. So it's like it's your data.
yeah. Well, that was one of the best studies I've seen up to this date. I mean, and when you look at it from a historical perspective, I mean, vitamin C. I mean, this goes back to the 1930s. So this is not, it's not like this is new. And Linus Pauling and Ewing McGregor, these these pioneers, they brought ideas and they thought bigger and out of the box when we had such limited capacity like the digital age that we currently exist in. So they did so much
Mhm.
more with so little, and we do so much less with so much.
Mhm.
And so such great thinkers. And the lack of thinking, for example, when you look at Linus Pauling in the 1976, 1978 study on high dose IV vitamin C, of course, they only gave 10 grams. They gave it to terminal cancer patients. They found significant extension of life in those terminal cancer patients. And then a couple of conventional docs come along, and what's called the Mayo studies.
Mhm.
Collectively, they weren't anybody called Mayo, and what they did is they then changed the IV and did it orally. Didn't understand the basic pharmacokinetic properties of pharmacology in that principle, and then from that standpoint said, well, oral 10 grams vitamin C doesn't work. Well, it's like Linus Pauling said, but we gave IV 10 grams IV vitamin C. They said, well, it doesn't work. And so that's been the battle ever since.
Mhm.
And then it's been a battle for the narrative, which people go, what are you talking about? Medicine is much a battle for the narrative as it is a battle for the health of the patient.
Mhm.
And if we can control the narrative, and people don't like to hear that, but controlling the narrative opens the ability to help more patients.
Mhm.
And so we have to recognize that medium out there to control the narrative, that is, here's what you do, here's a standard of care. It's like, but yeah, what if we can change the narrative and say, but if we add this to help the standard of care, does that not improve efficacy and reduce and improve quality of life? Yes, then let's do that. Then let's do that. So yeah.
Mhm. One of the things I'm dealing with a lot as we're, again, growing into this space is patients are coming in and they're overwhelmed with the financial cost because they're
Mm.
used to going to conventional and it's kind of on this black Amex invisible card that they don't have to pay anything right now, even though they're going to get a large bill down the road. But for our type of medicine, I would assume a lot of it is out of pocket. So, how do you help them overcome that or balance that challenge in your practice? What are some strategies you use, or how do you prioritize things for them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple points there. Number one, I think with where we are in medicine in the United States, there's an opportunity to change that. And I think that's very important, with RFK. We need to open up integrative medicine to basically the payment system. There needs to be an assessment of treatments and a reimbursement of treatments based on outcomes. And I think if we did that, we would actually see an improvement in coverage. Because when you look at a lot of the treatments out there in conventional oncology, it's like, well, how well do they work? Yeah, they don't, but they get covered. They get
Yeah.
covered. And so people go that route. And it's like, well, that makes no sense. So we have to open up the model of insurance. And I think we need to get a change in how that insurance model works as well. Because I think the insurance model is set up to control the flow of money, not to help patients, and the government's involved in that. They get in bed, and what happens is they push the doctor and the patient out of the bed, and so we're
Mhm.
on the floor going, wait a second, this system
Yeah.
is for us.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, but we got this king bed and we're just going to lay in it. So I
Yeah.
think we need to open up how that system works,
Mhm.
to invite new therapy ideas based on outcomes. But what we do is, with where I work right now, Williams Cancer Institute, um, we do these therapies outside the United States.
Mhm.
And we do that because of the innovation. The regulation in the United States limits innovation. I mean, that's just a given. It limits
Mhm.
innovation.
Mhm.
And we do it outside the United States as we innovate, but we're able to reduce the cost. And so that's how we do that in part,
Mhm.
because the costs there are lower. The costs in the United States are exponentially higher. So that's a choice we've made there. Now, we work with the Mexican FDA, we work with the US FDA.
Mhm.
So it's not like we're subverting all of this system, but we have to find how we can provide this innovative therapeutic care to patients in a
Mhm.
way that's more economical,
Mhm.
definitely. But that's one of the major challenges. That's how we head those challenges up, is
Yeah.
is through that mechanism. But yeah, it comes down. Unfortunately, one of the biggest hindrances, and we see this a lot in the comments and social media, is the cost. And you're right, the cost is front loaded versus back loaded. And so that backloaded cost, people forget about that. And if we can maybe get that front load cost, lower the cost is what we're trying to do, and then maybe spread it out, I think that's another mechanism to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's one of the negatives for sure. And I don't think that's by just happenstance. I think that's intentional because it keeps a lot of people from stepping into that space, both from a practitioner standpoint and from a patient standpoint. And so I think it's there by design. Keep it out so patients and doctors don't go in there.
Yeah. No. And to your point, I think insurance is legal money laundering. That's all it is. And
Oh yeah.
the patient's the last priority.
Oh no, they are. Let's be more blunt. They are a commodity. They
Yeah.
are a commodity to make money off of throughout their entire life, from birth to death. How can we make money on
Yeah.
these individuals? We are a can of green beans sitting on the shelf. That's how we're viewed.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to put you on the spot here just a minute because I imagine you're getting some of the similar calls that I am. Patients that want ivermectin and fenben, or they're treating themselves at home with ivermectin and fenben because they heard about it on Twitter, and they come into our office and they think that's all they're going to get. I'm assuming you have a very similar experience in that, and trying to explain that that's a very small percentage of actually how we treat cancer. That's a challenge I'm facing, and I'm wondering if you're facing the same thing.
Wow, that we could spend a couple hours just talking about that. In fact, I've got to be launching a teaching module here very, very soon within Nation Winter's network on repurposed medications and
Oh,
repurposed
nice.
therapies. And the first module, I touch on ivermectin, I touch on mebendazole, I touch on fenbendazole, and I touch on mebendazole versus fenbendazole. So what I would say to that is, Paul Urich, an immunologist back in the early 20th century, I encourage people to check out. He is where the concept of the magic bullet came from. He wanted to treat one disease with one chemical, and he was treating syphilis. And so it was treating syphilis with salvaricane. And so he thought this, well, I can treat one disease with one chemical. That's where actually the first word chemotherapy came from. It had nothing to do with oncology. But that continues to permeate medicine, not just in treatment, but in causation. And so it's something we've been taught for over 100 years to think that way, which is, well, I have cancer, so I only need to do this and this. Or what caused my cancer? Well, only this. Now, cancer is a multi-pronged process, except if you were born near Chernobyl, right? I mean, that's like boom. And we have a couple patients like that were actually, born, raised in Chernobyl when it blew up. And so, of course, they have cancer. That's a major hit. But most people in what we are dealing with cancer today, it is an epigenetic, it is a lifestyle, it is a multi-pronged process. So when you look at those two repurposed medications, I've really been shocked about how a lot of doctors in the social media world and internet space have embraced that. Now, what I would say about ivermectin, I think, is a great repurposed medication that can be an adjunct in an integrative oncology practice to help patients. I mean, we inject it intratumorally at the Williams Cancer Institute. Why? Because we want to move cold tumors hot. We want to take them from a non-immunoresponsive to an immunoresponsive, because that's what we're after, activation of the immune system against the tumor to generate an abscopal effect. But you have to understand that there's no one treatment for cancer. So though we can use ivermectin, we have to use it in a way that fits within the perspective of the treatment strategy, because it's repurposed medications are one thing, just one thing. And so I think ivermectin has a place for sure. I use it in most of my patients. Now, I think the evidence is still open. How do we properly dose this in humans? What's the proper human equivalent dose? People are out there advocating for this high dose ivermectin. I'm going, where's your data? There's no data there for 1.5 milligrams per kilogram. Where is that? I've seen high dose ivermectin cause seizures in patients. It doesn't readily cross the blood-brain barrier except at that high dose. and it can create some CNS side effects. So I think there's a lot of still yet to be learned aspects of how to use ivermectin, but it doesn't mean we can't use it. We must use it as the evidence guides us. Integrative medicine simply means we're following the science. We don't have to get ahead of it, but let's be involved in activating and promoting the science as well. Now, fenbendazole is a completely different argument. When you look at the evidence, and I break this down in this course, which will be online, there'll actually be a book that goes with it. The evidence for fenbendazole is so weak, so weak. And in fact, what people go, well, it's not FDA approved for human use, obviously, but it is for animal use. And people would go, hey, it's approved for animals. Why not us? Well, because there's actually some of the preliminary data in animals show it increases, liver cancer. It's like, well, that's a pause. What is this? And so there's actually 4 or 5 studies that show that. All the studies on fenbendazole are not positive, and they are very limited in quantity. Very limited in quantity. Many of them are negative. And so we have such limited data on fenbendazole, but it comes from an anecdotal story, right? It comes from a gentleman who had a great outcome with, I think it was non-small cell lung cancer, and was using Keytruda, got chemotherapy before, but he was using this in conjunction with Keytruda, which is an immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy, and some other supplements. And people forget all of that history, and they lock in on those. And I think the data on fenbendazole is so limited that it warrants not being used there. But actually, there's 3 or 4 in vitro studies that actually looked at all the benzimidazoles. So fenbendazole, mebendazole, oxfenbendazole, etc. And that they found repetitively across all of them that the most efficacious, the most effective therapy, if we're trying to look at the anti-cancer mechanism, so here, microtubules, etc., mebendazole far outperforms any of the others. And so if mebendazole is FDA approved for human use, we don't have to worry about contaminants. We have better studies, massively more studies, and I highlight this in this course, on mebendazole versus fenbendazole. We know more how to dose mebendazole. We have more studies about the toxicokinetics of mebendazole versus we have almost none about fenbendazole. Why don't we use mebendazole? But yet, all over social media, doctors are advocating for fenbendazole. And I don't get it. And here's what I think is driving it. Patients don't trust medicine. Doctors don't trust medicine. I mean, there was a Journal of American Medical Association online 50-state survey published in November, I think it was November of last year, could have been October, that showed that only 40% of patients trust medicine as a whole. Yeah. So I think there's this massive distrust between patients and medicine, but also doctors and medicine. And I think that's what's fueling a lot of this. But I think we must step into that space and speak evidence to do that. But you're exactly correct, Dr. James, that this is one piece. Yeah. It has to be used in conjunction with a total program, but it must be targeted as well. Meaning we can't look at repurposed medications and just say, throw it on the wall and hope it sticks. Treat it like a protocol medicine. No. We must target this as much as we can based on genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, immunomodulomics, etc. We must target these therapies as much as we can. That's how we move from the one-size-fits-all approach to precision cancer care, which is the right treatment for the right patient in the right combination at the right time. And that's what we have to do. And repurposed medications are one of those flagships, but we must move away from fenbendazole. We must follow the science and understand it fits within the context of an overarching treatment program.
I actually think that this online story, this narrative that is going, that's simplified down, is going to hurt a lot of people, because they think I can eat what I want, I can live how I want, and if I get stage 4 cancer, I'm just going to take a couple pills and it's all going to melt away. And I think that's going to end up hurting a lot of people that are treating their cancers at home with animal meds.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And in fact, what I see online is people saying, well, here's another article. Now, I'm a big person on words. I think words are powerful. The pen is mightier than the sword. The word is mightier than the sword. And so when they use that word, article, it's implying research article. And they're presenting it that way.
Mhm.
but it's simply somebody writing their anecdotal story of I took XYZ. I had stage 4X cancer. I took XYZ. And now look at me, I'm cured. Well,
Mhm.
who confirms stage XYZ cancer, treatment of XYZ? Were they also taking A, B, C, D, E, F from their oncologist? I mean, what else was going on?
Mhm.
There's many studies that show that patients don't tell their doctors 80%. So 8 out of 10 patients will not tell their doctors the whole story. So when these anecdotal studies or stories are not studies, are presented as studies, I think it
Mhm.
perpetuates that issue. And we have a responsibility to follow the science. What I see in some of integrative medicine right now, Dr. James, is doctors falling trapped to some of the same problems that conventional medicine has. And we need to clean that up. And we have to speak science into that, open and discuss it, but be honest about it, but not confuse patients and say, here's an article. No, that's not an article. That's a patient's story, which is great if they're actually in recovery and remission. That's fantastic. But we have to understand the context of what the evidence actually says about that therapeutic.
Mhm.
Because I do believe, as you said, that is perpetuating the concept that all you need to do is take ivermectin and fenbendazole. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to understand that dietary, lifestyle, stress, sleep, everything, every other component that goes into the development of cancer, that thus must go into the recovery from cancer,
Mhm.
doesn't play a role, but it actually does.
Mhm. Yeah. One of the hardest things we face is that patients go to their standard of care team. They may have stage 3, stage 4 advanced cancer. And all they hear on that side of it is like basically, you're going to die. Pick your hospice. If you don't do this chemotherapy, you're going to be dead in this amount of time. I can't even imagine telling somebody that. How do you get your patients to a headspace that overcomes that negative side of things and addresses, because the mentality of recovery is so important to success?
Yeah, I'm stunned. It's like medicine, at least in the oncological world. Oh, it's it almost embraces death. It's like patients don't go to doctors when you have cancer to be told what they already know. If you're diagnosed with stage 3, stage 4 cancer, there's probably no word that garners more fear than that word, cancer. And so when patients are diagnosed with cancer, they know in their mind mortality is at risk. They know that. The last thing they need from their doctor is, yeah, not only is your mortality a risk, I'm telling you, it's going to hit you front and center in 3 months.
Mhm.
I always jokingly, to try to diffuse a situation when I talk to patients, I'll say, I don't remember in medical school where we were taught how to play God with a little g by predicting people's outcomes. I don't
Right.
remember that. Oh, you're going to die in 3 months. Really? Yeah, you may die tomorrow, meaning myself. I may not make it home.
Mhm.
So, nobody can predict the future, no one.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I look at our jobs as physicians. We in the word Hebrew in physician is raphe, literally means healer, and the word doctor in Latin can be translated teacher. And there's some crossover there. So we're teachers that heal.
Mhm.
But I think our job is to give patients hope. I mean, that's why they come to us. They want treatment. They want healing as far as their body go. But to do that, we have to, I think, counter that fear with
Mhm.
hope. Because fear suppresses the immune system, it creates stress. And so, if you want to help that cancer grow and spread, do exactly what they do, which is advocate fear, and then that'll help the cancer spread by immunosuppression. Makes no sense. But people go, well, you can't give them false hope. It's like, well, do you even know what that word means? Hope. No, 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 no. Hope literally means confidence in tomorrow. That's it. Confidence in tomorrow. So, does that mean what that tomorrow looks like? No. It just means tomorrow is there. I have confidence in it. So,
Mhm.
what do we do to build out what that looks like? That's
Mhm.
our job. That's our job. Our job is to build out what tomorrow looks like for that patient,
Mhm.
what it looks like for their quality of life. help the body heal, and then let the body decide how far it goes. When we limit the potential outcome, we limit outcomes. But if we don't limit the outcomes, doesn't mean we have amazing outcomes from everybody, but we increase the presence of outcomes for many. So I think we got to move away from this mentality that conventional medicine just is perpetuating negativity and fear, and say, let's get back to what it means to be a teacher, what it means to be a healer. And I think the way we contrast that fear is we contrast it with hope, but it must be within the right context. And I think by doing that, we can say, look, let's build out that tomorrow. Let's build it out and then go from there.
Mhm.
So
So,
that's how I approach it.
mhm. Knowing that the treatment in this realm is extremely complex and individualized, are there one or two treatments that really stand out to you as must haves or very helpful that the average patient hasn't heard of?
Wow. That hasn't heard of. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of patient treatment is dictated by their cancer and where things are.
Mhm.
I'll touch on, I think, two treatments here. Number one, the gut microbiome.
Mhm.
And the gut microbiome here, but I'm specifically talking about fecal transplantation. And because when we look at what we know about the gut microbiome, how it impacts the immune system, how it impacts immunotherapy, how it even impacts the tumor microbiome and chemotherapy. The gut
Mhm.
microbiome, I believe, is the next phase, the next generation of treatment in the integrative oncology space, and we're already there at the Williams Cancer Institute, and so we're moving into that. All of our patients get fecal transplantations, and we do that to augment their immunotherapy. I mean, there's animal research that shows that about 5% of the microbiome from a fecal transplant actually reaches the tumor microbiome in pancreatic cancer as a pancreatic cancer model, and that improves outcome to chemotherapy. So get that. A fecal transplant to basically change the gut microbiome of the recipient, that gets transferred to the tumor microbiome, and that then changes the treatment outcome. That's
That's
crazy.
great.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I would say fecal transplantation is one thing. We're actually working on research right now in that arena, but it's super exciting, super exciting. I
Yeah.
think the other would be moving away from the systemic to tumor approach and go to the tumor. Because and in that, the key theme is the immune system. What we've had over the last 100 years, but particularly since Nixon declared war on cancer in 1971, which was the only disease that I'm aware of that actually officially had war declared on it, and we've been fighting that war ever since. We've turned the body into a battlefield. So the whole concept of cancer has been built on war. And by the way, chemotherapy was born out of war from the conventional oncological standpoint. But that go to war on cancer, it permeates every aspect of oncology. But what we need to, and what that does is it destroys the immune system, and it sets the stage for recurrence and metastasis. And when cancer spreads, that's metastasis. That's 90% of why there's morbidity and mortality in cancer. So if we shrink a tumor for 1 year, yet we set the stage for it to spread, which leads to 90% of mortality, that is not an acceptable outcome. We must change it. The way we change it is we go to the tumor, we activate the immune system, and let the immune system do its job. So that's the intratumoral approach. And that's the innovation where I think we need to be, is to, instead of systemic to tumor, move to tumor, combine it with some systemic therapies for sure, integrative, and yeah, maybe some conventionals, but hopefully less.
Mhm.
But that intratumoral approach activates the immune system, and we can even inject intratumoral vitamin C. We do that. Intratumoral Dawn, intratumoral 3BP, intratumoral ivermectin. But yeah, intratumoral Keytruda, Opdivo, Yervoy, but massively microdosing it. And by
Mhm.
creating a immune activation infiltration into the tumor microenvironment, then the immune system activates itself and trains itself against the tumor. But then, as we know what the immune system does, it transfers that out systemically. It's called the abscopal effect. Ab, away from, scopus, target. It
Mhm.
originally described in 1953 in the radiation literature by Dr. R.H. Moll. So this is not new. But now with ablation and tumor immunotherapy, we're able to target this. But I would leave with this third one. I think where medicine's going, the future, regeneration. Regeneration.
Mhm.
David Sinclair at Harvard, Yamanaki won Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2012, Yamanaki factors, OCT4, KL4, SOX2, transcription factors, actually taking cancer cells, regenerating them back to normal. Actually, recent work out of Korea showing that that's possible. So I think where we're going is even more mind-blowing than the systemic to tumor to systemic. It's actually working to regenerate cancer cells back to pre-cancer cells, normal cells. I think that's where we're going.
Wow. And none of that is available in most places in the United States, right? Very little.
That's why we're in Mexico.
Yeah.
Now we
Yeah.
have an office here in California, okay, and we do some great things.
Hmm.
But and we have a phase 2 prostate cancer study in the U.S. So we're trying to work within the system to change the system. So we have a phase 2 prostate cancer that's just absolutely amazing in prostate here in the U.S. And we have a couple other phase 1s that are ongoing with the Mexican FDA, which we hope to get into the U.S. as well, and more to come.
Yeah. Where can people follow you, find you, if they want more information about some of these treatments? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, what they'll find is I have a lot of different platforms, and it's because the messaging is unique there. Of course, they
Yeah.
can find me at williamscancerinstitute.com. But then I have my own personal brands, and that's where I work with Dr. Williams, who, by the way, he and I went to medical school together. We sat right next to each other for 2 years. It's crazy that we reconnected. But Doc, that's DOC Goodyear.com, but also pre-scribe.com. That's where you'll find my podcast and blogging and other mediums there. But then off-script.rx, off-script.rx.com. That is a primarily just repurposed medication medium there to discuss the science behind repurposed medications, the pros and the cons of that, and understand repurposed medications exist far beyond just ivermectin and
Mhm.
fenbendazole, mebendazole, et cetera. There's many, many others. Actually, I just recorded a reel the other day, clavosomine. It's an antibiotic used for leprosy,
Mhm.
and it helps to improve immunotherapy significantly
Yeah.
and reduces side effects. It's like,
Yeah.
wow. But then the primary and all the social medias accordingly, but you can also find me on dr.goodyear. That's my primary Instagram account. And then, of course, the blog post, the podcast, which is pre-scribe.com. So prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear. So that's where they
Yeah.
can find me,
So we'll
all over the
list
place.
all of those in the show notes. Yeah, so that you can connect with him. As you can tell, a beautiful educator, committed to this, and fascinating to listen to. So I really appreciate you being here. And I think the message that I want to get out to patients is that integrative cancer care isn't an option. It isn't a luxury. It's essential because you've probably heard Dr. Thomas Lodi say, if you take a healthy person and give them chemotherapy, you'll make them sick. So how can you take a sick person and give them chemotherapy and expect to make them well? And there's so many things that we can add and augment and make sure that are addressed for people. So
And I'll leave with this. The word integrative, it comes from a Latin word integrationum. And that word means to restore, renew, get this, make whole.
wow.
That is integrative medicine. Our job is to make the patient whole, not to destroy them, make them whole.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate you being here today. I hope we can have you back again soon to keep us updated what's going on. And I appreciate you.
Have a great rest of your trip, Dr. James, and always a pleasure.